Um, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and start because I think everyone's in now. But yeah, as you'll have maybe gleaned, I'm Jenna. I'm the editorial director at Verve Books, and I'm delighted to be welcoming you to this event with Sarah Etter and Lucy Rose. Um, we're going to be discussing their two latest UK releases in a minute. But before we get started, I'm just going to quickly run through the event structure and some housekeeping. So everyone should be on mute with their cameras off, except for myself, Sarah, and Lucy. And just so you know, the event is being recorded so that we can potentially share clips on social media and stuff. I hope that's okay with everyone. The event is going to be running until 8 p.m. If you're in the UK, that is. It's going to be running from 7 till 8. And for the first part of the evening, I'm going to be asking Lucy and Sarah some questions. And then for the last portion of the event, I'm going to be putting audience questions to them. So basically, just any time throughout the event, put your questions in the chat, and I'll go through them probably at around 20 to 8 and start asking. And it can be literally anything. If you think of something as we're talking or as you're listening to Sarah and Lucy converse with each other, please do just put them in because yeah, any question, I'm more than happy to ask them. Okay, so to get started, I'm just going to give you a bit of insight into the books that we're going to be talking about tonight, which Lucy's debut novel, The Lamb, and Sarah's debut novel, The Book of X. So The Lamb is a literary debut. It's Lucy's multi-layered folk horror novel that centres on a mother and daughter who live in the forest and harbour a dark secret. It's being published by Orion on the 30th of January, and you can pre-order it now from anywhere you get your books. And The Book of X is Sarah Etter's debut, and it's a surreal feminist novel that kind of straddles a whole load of genres, but kind of literary dystopian and body horror. It was first published in the US by $2 Radio in 2019, but Verve are publishing it in the UK for the first time today. So happy publication day, Sarah. You might be familiar with Sarah's second novel, Ripe, already, which Verve published in summer of 2023 in the UK. And Sarah's based in LA as well. So I wanted to say a special thank you to her for joining us tonight, considering everything that's going on there at the moment.
Yeah, Jenna and Lucy, thank you for doing this with me. Lucy, I'm such a huge fan of your book, and Jenna, Verve has been an incredible support of my work. And just as a kind of, I just have to say, for everyone that's in LA going through such a hard time, if you have any extra funds and you want to donate to mutual aid, there's plenty of places online you can find. And it's just been really heartbreaking. I'm lucky enough to have evacuated, so I'm happy to do this event, but I just have to say that little caveat that there are a lot of people having a hard time right now. So if you can help, please do.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's been quite shocking to see what's been happening in LA in the last few days, and we really appreciate you still kind of showing up tonight, Sarah, in spite of it all. But yeah, so I'm just going to get into.
I have a sickness inside of me. I cannot miss an event. And I would never out to Lucy ever. So yeah, I really appreciate both of you for doing this. And I guess during full dystopia, having art is probably more important than ever, and having community is really important too. So I'm glad to be here.
Okay, well, I think this is like a good time to just get into it then. My first, I guess, question is for both of you to introduce your own novels and give the audience a taste of what they're about in your own words. I think do a little reading as well. So I don't know which one of you wants to go first. Maybe.
I'd love to have Lucy start because I love this book so much. So I'm gonna make Lucy go first.
I will happily go first. I'm so excited to be here, by the way. I absolutely love your books. So doing this event with you is just brilliant. So I've written a book called The Lamb, which is a folk horror about a mother and a daughter who live in a woodland together, and they take in passers-by known as strays, lost souls. And they eat them. They cook them into lovely stews and lovely pies. But everything kind of changes one day when a new stray shows up at the door and the dynamic of the family starts to slightly shift. And I thought I'd just read like a paragraph or two from my first chapter, if that's okay. Here we go. On my 4th birthday, I plucked 6 severed fingers from the shower drain. The tub yellowed near the plug hole, and there was a peachy hue up the curve of the bath. It was the same colour as my skin, milky and a little buttery, like the outer edges of a bruise. Mildew and dried up water peppered the glass screen. Black mould had crawled up the plaster and between the grout. The bathroom was small, and the dark corners harboured cobwebs, rings of damp, and hairline cracks. I wanted to lick the black speckles of mould littered along the wall. I hoped it would taste as it smelt, like musty brambles or rain splashing in a muddy puddle. The first finger I picked up had purple nail polish flaking away from its nail. The second was clean of cosmetics, but it was short, bitten at, and uneven along its ridge. My fingertip followed the edge of the nail. When I looked down at the plug hole, I realized the rest of the fingers were too far gone to tell anything about who they'd once been attached to.
Oh, it's so good.
Thank you.
No, thank
We'll
you.
talk about this in a second, but like I think what I love about you already is you just have a killer first sentence. You know? Um, yeah, so I'm gonna read from the $2 radio version because I had to leave a lot of books at home. So please forgive me there. And I'm gonna, just like Lucy, just read a couple of the first paragraphs. I was born and not like my mother and her mother before her. Picture 3 women with their torsos twisted like thick pieces of rope with a single hitch in the center. The doctors had the same reaction each birth. They lifted our slick, warped bodies into the air and stared, horrified. All 3 of us wailed, strange new animals, our lineage gnarled, aching, hardened. Outside, beyond the bright white lights of the hospital, the machine of the world kept grinding on, a metal mouth baring its teeth, a maw waiting to claw down on us. I'm not religious, but I damn well prayed, my mother says, exhaling smoke over the kitchen table. I rubbed the rosaries raw that you would take after your father. My mother's knot rests against the kitchen table, and in my tender moments, I want to reach out and place a hand there. But as soon as you crowned, I knew it, my mother says. I could feel your knot. When my mother tells this story, I take long sips of my lemonade to keep quiet. I know she screamed the whole birth. I brought her the same pain she brought her mother. Your father says I went possessed, my mother says. My eyes roll back into my head.
Thank you, Sarah. I mean, I'm the editor of Sarah's book in the UK, and I'm still, obsessed with. Every time I read it, it feels fresh. And maybe, do you want to give people a short plot summary before we really get into it, and then I can start asking more questions?
Yeah, sure. So this is a book about a girl who's born in the shape of a knot, like her mother and her mother before her, and she lives in a very surreal world, and she's really grappling with what it's like to have a body.
Yeah, I mean that's like the perfect way to sum it up. I think the best place I think to start this conversation is that these two books are both books that deal very much in women's bodies and also in elements of horror. I don't think either of the books are like straight horror books, but they do have a engage with particularly feminist horror and feminist horror and sci-fi and dystopian fiction is having such a huge moment right now among like creators and audiences across multiple art forms, particularly body horror. We've kind of seen it recently with the big like impact of the substance and all the attention that that's getting, plus books like Bunny and Boy Parts and Tender as the Flesh. Like there's just been loads over the last couple of years, and the popularity only seems to be growing. I wondered if you wanted to talk about why you think these genres lend themselves to exploration of women's lives and experiences so well, and why do you think that women-driven horror is surging in popularity at this particular moment in time?
Can I go first? Is that all right?
Yeah.
I just got to say, like, this question is just, I just think it's just the most relevant question in terms of horror. Like, I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but I feel like the reason that these issues are so potent at the moment is because horror is a genre where you can take everything to its logical extreme. And I kind of feel like women feel like things are going to a certain extreme and we're experiencing things in a certain extreme. varying degrees across different countries and different cultures. But I find it, I don't know if anyone else feels like this, but I find it really hard to see women in across the pond or in, different countries. I kind of grieve for them in a way sometimes because I feel like we're all part of this like sisterhood, and it's really difficult to watch what's happening. And so I think horror brings a catharsis to people that is like muchly needed. It gives them a breath. It gives them a space to kind of experience a lot of their anxiety in like a controlled, safe environment that's not actually damaging to them. I don't know if that's something that resonates with you, Sarah.
Yeah, I think my answer to this is twofold. The first is that in the beginning, when I was writing like this, there were a lot of people who didn't want to touch it. And so I felt for a very long time like a freak and an outsider. And so it's very fascinating to me to see the times kind of catching up with what I think a lot of women have felt for a very long time, and also have not had the ability to express. And I think we're really starting to see that with things like Night Bitch, where people are finally admitting like, hey, being a mother is really hard. It's not as beautiful as we made it look in the 60s when we had the, or the 50s when we had these like perfect homes and it was supposed to be the ideal for every woman. And so part of me is very sad that my work feels like it was a little bit seeing the future. I wish it wasn't the case. With Ripe specifically, I mean, I wrote and sold that book before anything was happening with Roe v. Wade in the US. And so it really makes me deeply sad because during the editing process, I was like, oh, you're so edgy. You have an abortion in this book. You should take it out. Like, that was really my thought process because it was not even on the table. And by the time that went through printing and was released, it suddenly mattered a whole lot. And so I think one of the things that's really interesting to me is there's no way to anticipate how bad things were going to get. And so many of us must have felt subconsciously or have kind of seen what was coming. Um, the other thing I think, and I think you might feel this way too, Lucy, the surrealism and the horror, I think creates a third space outside of politics and outside of our current events that might help bring other people to the table to see what we're going through. And because you're able to remove things like Democrat and Republican, obviously I'm a full-fledged liberal socialist, like I'm on as pretty far left as you can go without blowing shit up. The reality is, in order to get people to hear you, you often need to create the third space so that they don't feel like you're pointing a finger at them. And I'm not saying that my goal in life is to bring, bigots to the table, because obviously it's not. But I do think there's a way where we can use work like this to hopefully get people to see what it's like to be a woman, a person of color, someone who's trans, right? And one of the things that excites me a lot when we talk about surrealism, one of the biggest critiques I get is, oh, that was all white men. And one, that's wrong, because there were plenty of women and people of color who were doing that work at the time. It just was not what historians, focused on, obviously, because the historians were also white dudes. But what's happening now in surrealism that I feel is so exciting is that it's really dealing with issues of body, race, gender in a way that I feel is so important, and so necessary. And so it has become much more political to write horror, I think, and to write surrealism. I think all of those elements are creeping in here.
What's so interesting though, what you said there about like surrealism, which I think is just so true, is surrealism expresses something like that kind of exhausted feeling that we have waking up because there's just so much going on. It's so hard to hold everything. And I think when you've got to hold so much and look at so much, that things that are going on and quantify them and understand them, surrealism is kind of the only way to unpack like all of those different pieces, which is something you do really really well, I think, in your books. But I just think there's something in that surrealist aspect of horror, which surrealism is something you only really get in genre spaces because you have the license to kind of make the worlds have such strong surreal emotions.
And I think it's the same for you in the sense that in addition, you also get a chance to really strip back and reduce noise. Because what I see in both of our works is not only a fragmentary writing style, which I would love to talk to you about, and very simple sentences, right? But also a real paring down of the world, right? Like when you create a surrealist world, you don't have to address CNN or BBC or
Yeah.
all the noise that we're getting all the time. Like a big part of the surrealism in Book of X was I wanted to create a story that had no time and no place. So when
Oh,
people bring up the meat quarry or cleaning the walls with lemons, a lot of that was so I wouldn't have to address like a technology or a type of cleaning solution, right? Because if I say that they have a farm and they're harvesting corn. Now I have to tell you what kind of machine they're using. Now you can find a place and a time for that, right? And it becomes very narrow the minute that you reference that. And so I think the other thing that I really enjoy about surrealism is it actually, in a crazy way, can become very quiet compared to the world around us.
that's so true. It's like it focuses, doesn't it? And it allows you to take a breath.
I was going to say, especially in your book, I did see that really stripping down of, especially because of like where they live and they're kind of at a remove. And I felt like we very much had that in common, where it's kind of like the entryway to society is through like, I have to go to school because I'm a little girl. And I was also very interested in the fact that both of us start with them as children, these girls. And I just kind of would love to know how your novel started for you. Like, did you get the first sentence as a download and then just take off? Like, how did it work for you?
I mean, for the lamb, it started as like basically a series of vignettes. I'd written like 15,000 words of flash fictions, and they were always about this mother and this daughter, and it was always like they were so far away from everything. And eventually, kind of like after that 15,000 words point, I was like, hang on, this is the same family. And in some of them, they ate human meat, and in some of them they didn't. They kind of in these different pockets. It was a bit of an everything everywhere all at once, where there was all these just sort of different fragments of them, and so I had like lots of fun finding those pieces and bringing them together and kind of creating a more fleshed out image of who these women are, um, outside of their appetites. I mean, how about you as well? Because I love the way you write. The vignettes I find so interesting because when I was reading it, I felt I don't sometimes when you're in like a minority or if you're marginalized in any way, like I feel there's a lot of dissociation. You kind of experience the world in these like shards, and that's how the book felt to me reading it was just like these really stunning shards and fragments and moments of life that like so I mean if anybody's read it like you will everybody has had some of those moments like you they're just stunning.
I mean, I also feel that way about your work because I think when you're writing in fragments, and I don't know if this will resonate with you, but the form was kind of twofold. The first is I had only ever written short stories, and then I got no writing residency in America would accept me other than to put me on a wait list. And I have a full-time job. So I couldn't be like, oh yes, tomorrow I can get on a plane and come to your residency, right? Like it's like a very privileged position to be like, oh yes, I can be on a wait list and just go for 3 months, right? I can't do that. And then I finally got a writing residency in Iceland, and I was like, this makes a lot of sense that like outside of America they love me, right? Especially at that point in my career, right? Because I only had like a little chapbook from my grad school program or whatever. But I never thought I could write a novel ever. And when I got to Iceland, there was supposed to be a painter, a photographer, a poet, and it was March in Iceland, and everyone dropped out the week before I went. So I was going to be alone in this cabin in this remote village. And it sounds like the beginning of a horror story, honestly. And I was terrified, but I got to the cabin and the sun was only going down probably 5 hours a day. And I think I wrote 70,000 words in a month, probably. And I never thought anyone would ever see it or publish it. And I had the first sentence and I just went. And I think the fragmentary portion is twofold. I think the first is we all have Twitter brain, and I do understand that I'm not in competition with other writers. I say this all the time. I am in competition with someone's phone going off, the dog needing to go out, a Netflix special dropping that everybody's watching. Like every writer in the world is my friend. What's not my friend is your phone going off, right? And in order to keep someone's attention, I really do believe you have to do some form of acrobatics on every page. You need to be doing a trick. you know, for lack of a better word. And also too, it keeps me entertained, right? I know I need to stop writing if I'm not confused or curious or picking at something. And so there are a lot of people who will tell you, sit down and write 1,000 words a day. And that never really worked for me because I could just write bullshit. You know, by the end, I'm like, I love my dog. My dog's so cute. And it's like, that's not what this is. So I got to a point where it was like, if you could write one good scene a day, doesn't matter how long it is can it be a good scene and you know you're going to use it? And what that leads to is, and I think I see this so much in your work, Lucy, is when you're doing fragmentary style, that last sentence of every fragment has got to be a banger. And you almost need each fragment to feel like a circle. It has to be so satisfying, like a morsel. And so when you're writing like that every day, you know, some days the scene is 500 words, some days it's 2,000 words. It is more satisfying for me, and I hope for the reader. And then also, like, it gives them less of a reason to put the book down because God knows the attention spans are shot, you know.
So true.
No, that I mean, I actually resonate with what you said there about Twitter brain, and I wouldn't have necessarily thought of it like that, but in the sense that I can tear through books with short chapters so much more quickly than if I see a book like and a chapter is 25 pages long, I'll be like, oh no, I can't commit to it. But I can scroll through my phone for hours as long as I'm scrolling through different pieces of content. So maybe reading short chapters feels like that, which
There's kind of two things here. I'm very fascinated that in 50 years, we are going to look back at this time and see that the entire shape of literature has changed as a result of technology, and that we do not really have a chance. Although I will say, I went back and read, you know, if you go read Moby Dick or Anna Karenina, these are all also fragmentary, right? So there is an argument that it feels new and it does feel shorter even than them. But if you do go back, I mean, especially when people were like serializing novels and they were you know, it still was happening. So it's like, it's a little bit of a catch-22 because part of it is Twitter brain, and also from the dawn of time, I think we've had no attention spans. You
I have,
know,
I have
Moby Dick still hits like that is, I wish I wrote Moby Dick. I'll say that.
It does slap. I have ADHD and autism, so for me, I just like could not write in like long bursts. My attention span goes so quickly, like almost like the reader, and I'm just so short fragments was kind of the only way I could get this novel finished. Otherwise, it would still very much be a Word doc.
Well, you know, also I have to say, I think there is a gender aspect. I think the number of women you see writing 1,000-page books versus men, I think there's quite a disparity. I think the people who have the means to write a 1,000-page book are often men. I would say also, I work full time. I have always worked full time. So the fragmentary style is often in service of the amount of time I have off from my job that I can complete the work and know that I'm going to use it. I have to be so rigid in my outlining. I'm still surreal and I still give myself space to play, but I can't really sit down at my desk and know that I'm going to burn a scene later. I would never publish a book that way. And so there is another part of this that is the form is capitalism.
That is such
100%.
an incredible observation about the length of books.
I
Is that
mean,
I mean, I
it's
don't want to offend any men in the crowd, but like I find in real conversations, like women never are able to dominate conversations for lengthy amounts of time. So that's an incredible observation.
I mean, I think too, like there is another part of that, at least in America, there is an expectation from most publishers that eventually you're going to give them a 1,000-page novel and they will ask you for that. Where's your magnum opus? And I really hate to see that, especially in America, because I've seen some of our greatest short form writers be pushed into that and the results are kind of varying. And you know, I do want to push back against that because at least in the US, I don't know if this is true in the UK, it's got to be 50,000 words or it's not a novel, right? And I'm over here going, okay, you know, when I brought Book of X back from Iceland, it was 70,000, but by the time it went to print, I think it was 41. And a lot of publishers in the US would be like, that's not a book, you know. But by the time you lay it out and you do all the fragments, you're still looking at like a lot of pages, my friends.
No, I mean that's definitely a thing here as well. And also it can depend on genre, like different like types of books have different word count expectations and all of that. And I mean it very much depends like on the publisher as well, obviously. Like I try not to enforce that as much and I'll just take things for what they are and but
You're
yeah,
doing the
there
Lord's work, Jenna. You're doing the Lord's work.
I mean, if
Listen,
someone tried to
this book is
deliver
a
a 1,000-page book to me, I wouldn't have time. I don't know when I could envision sitting and reading a 1,000-page manuscript. So
okay, but what if it
there's
was me and
that.
Lucy collaborating
Yeah.
on a
Oh,
thousand?
well, yeah. Then that's just two halves. I can do that. I would love that. I'm going to pivot now because I really want to ask you both why your books are so preoccupied with meat, which I think maybe our audience will all be wondering.
Lucy, you got to go first because your meat is different than my meat.
This is, yeah, there's two very distinct kinds of meat on the table. Um, I think for me, it's so interesting because I'm realizing a lot of this stuff after I've written the book. Like there's so much that you start to realize about yourself and about the world like once it's finished. Um, I have like always had a really complicated relationship with food. Like I'm an autistic girl who can basically eat like three different things. I've had troubles with weight. There's been times in my life where I've not been able to afford food in that way. Food generally is used to control people, specifically women, like in terms of I talk really vividly like to my friends and they kind of echo the same things about like remembering the Special K cereal box and
Oh,
like
yes. Oh, yes.
oh my God, not the Special K cereal box. And the measuring tape around the waist and, being like, if you eat this three times a day, you'll be happy and you'll be skinny and you'll be valuable. And I think that I think a lot of people can identify with having that fraught relationship to food, which is so sad because food is just such a natural part of our daily routines. It's something we have to do three times a day. I mean, we have to do it to live, which is nuts. And so the idea that something that is so essential to our survival, and also like our enjoyment, like it's not just a practical thing. Food is something that is like pleasurable, it's tasty, and like there's nothing better than having an amazing meal that is like delicious and has all the right textures. So I think I've just that I think I have like a conflict with the idea of food, and meat seems like the perfect kind of thing to talk about and to write about, especially as a woman, because sometimes I feel like one. So, I don't know if that's like if anyone identifies with that.
I mean, I think there's kind of two things happening, and one is we are clearly a generation, um, however you identify in terms of gender, many of us were raised by women who were dealing with the 80s diet craze and the Jenny Craig and the Special K and our mothers were insanely focused on food. I don't think I know one person, one woman, one or non-binary person who was not raised by a mother who was on some kind of crazy crash diet. And so we're in a kind of interesting time now where like obviously you have those Ozempic stuff going on, but there is a little bit less of a focus on that as because it was so prevalent. Lean cuisine, right? Everything was about like, how do I get skinny really, really fast? And so of course we're going to kind of be a generation of echoes of that, and a lot of what we're doing, especially for people in their 20s and 30s, I think is trying to undo that and figure out what does my body actually want and need? What do I actually want and need outside of all the noise, and all the pain that I watched my mother go through, right? And so I think that gives me a little bit of hope. In terms of meat for me, I think it goes back to the idea of one, I never thought anyone was going to read or publish this book. And so I just let myself do what I wanted. Um, I had the first sentence for the novel and then I just followed it. And I think for me, with every novel, it's like I have to get a first sentence that feels like a key that's unlocking a door. And as soon as I had that sentence, I had to think, all right, if I'm going to believe in this sentence, then what world would someone whose body is in the shape of a knot live in? Right? Because I felt that she lived 2 clicks over from my reality. Right. I felt like she was like with me, but also not with me. And so then I had to think about how would she be raised? What would her parents do? Right. And the meat quarry, I mean, I couldn't tell you where that came from. Some of the stuff I look back on, and the knotted woman is very prevalent in the work of the artist Louise Bourgeois. And I feel like that was subconsciously where that was coming from. Very similar to Lucy. I don't think I know what I'm doing until after I've done it. And, like 10 years later, I'm editing a short story collection right now. And like, I wrote some of these stories when I was 25 and I look at them and I'm like, holy shit, like I was saying that, like, and I didn't know. And I think that's very interesting to me in writing surrealism. I've realized, and Lucy, I don't know how true this is for you, so much of it is because I'm hiding from myself and I'm trying to understand this thing that's inside of me and I don't know what it is and I can't look directly at it. And this is how it comes out. And it takes me a very long time to figure out later what I was grappling with. Um, I bet you could do probably tons of psychological case studies on what I just said. I'm sure somebody is going to do a PhD on that. Yeah, the meat for me was partially a way to avoid time. And then it also felt very masculine. It felt like something they wouldn't let a girl do. And so that was really helpful. And it's very funny because I don't talk about movie stuff much because I just don't trust Hollywood. I may have whatever. I shouldn't have said that. Point being that always feels like a lotto scratch off ticket. But there's a producer who's involved with the Book of X, and she's a vegetarian. And she said I knew I wanted to be involved in this because I couldn't put this book down, and I hate meat. And I was like, I'll take that as a win.
Um, I'm going to touch on the topic of mothers now because I think it's something that comes up on both of your novels, particularly mothers whose influence on their daughters is dark and often harmful or at least unconventional. And I think quote unquote bad mothers appear frequently in horror and in fiction in general. And I wonder if you wanted to like talk about this and the role of the bad mother in your own novels and in fiction in general. Why are bad mothers so scary as a concept, but also so common in fiction? And why aren't we as shocked or terrified of sort of fatherly feelings, I guess?
I'll go first on this one, Lucy, if you want me to.
Yeah, that's a hard question. I'll let you.
Oh, I'm like, this is an easy one.
Oh no.
So I'm gonna avoid talking about this on like the personal level with me and my mother because I think that's less interesting. And that's for therapy, not for this Zoom. But I will say, very similar to the diet culture, many of us were raised by women who were forced directly into being married and went from their parents' homes to a man's home and had us when they were very young. I mean, my mom had me when she was 24. Okay. She did not. I have had the experience of living in a big city, having money to go to therapy, having money to go see art and the world and figure out who I am as a person. She immediately went from being someone's daughter to being someone's wife and mother. And if I would have had a child at 24, I know I would have fucked it up big time. There's no way because you just don't even know who you are at 24. Your brain is not even ready to do that, right? And all you're gonna do is like hand down what you got because the only thing you have as a model is whatever happened to you. So I do think, in spite of all of the threats to women's rights, and especially in America, this is something that is harrowing to me and keeps me up. And I literally moved halfway across the country once my rights were taken away in Texas. Like I get it. And that said, I think you had a generation of women who want us to have freedom and at the same time resent us for having the freedom because they didn't get to do it. And it is heartbreaking because you have women who were basically trapped into, I think, I would say trapped. I'm sorry. I'm sure there are people who wanted to do this, etc. But the expectation to get married and have a kid and be heterosexual was so strong. And now you have our generation of women who, and non-binary people who are doing what they want and have the freedom. And it has to be really hard to watch other people get that. and you didn't have it, you know? I don't know if that makes sense or if I'm like over speaking, but I do
Oh,
think that's the friction between mothers and daughters. And I think a lot of women right now are grappling with having mothers who supported them and helped them, but might resent the shit out of them.
I think just, like echo everything you said there. And I think it's so interesting as well because I feel like, when we talk about, you mentioned fathers and why fathers are not frightening. And I think it's because like a lot of people grew up in a home where fathers were typically more absent and mothers were kind of more present in the home. I know that like around Christmas there's a big meme that like the dads don't actually know what's in the wrapping paper. And I think that that physical and emotional absence means like you can't be scared of something that isn't a threat to you, if that makes sense. Not that all mothers are threats, but like if the thing that is frightening you, or the thing that is like a negative energy that's in the home is the mother, because the mother is there, then the mother's human. Like she's gonna have good days, she's gonna have bad days. And I think another difference between mothers and fathers as well is that the role of being a father is not all consuming and all encompassing, whereas the role of being a mother, you become a mother, full stop, and that's it. And there's kind of nothing after that. And I think that's what society views you as. And then everything you do is kind of judged based upon, well, if you go out with your friends and party, you're a bad mum. So you can't, that human part of you that exists and wants to go out and still be a person and still be a girl. And I touch on it in my book for like a really, like literally a sentence where the daughter realizes that her mother was once a daughter, and the mother corrects her and she's like, well, I'm still a daughter. Like that part of me still exists. She's still there. And I think it's just that's just to build upon what you've said already, because what you're talking about, that transition between two very different generations, like it's so real. And I feel that so strongly. Like when you were saying that, I was like, yeah, I feel that in my soul.
It's also such a big jump. I mean, I'm going to be a little bit US specific, but women in the United States only were allowed to have credit cards in the 70s. They couldn't have credit. The diamond ring that people think, oh, women want to rock, that was because if they ever got divorced, they wanted something they could sell because they they did not have the economic ability to live alone and be by themselves. And so I think we have seen such a huge jump between our mother's generations and ours. There was no discussion of mental health. There was no discussion of how to be an independent person outside of the role of mother and wife. I love what you said about the dads. They were at work. They got to come home and be the fun guy at dinner and on the weekends. And to your point, not only they did not know what was in the gifts, but like I remember every Christmas, my mother never had anything in her stocking because she did everyone else's stocking and no one bothered to do hers. Right. I don't know if you guys have stockings in the UK. Just go with me here. And sorry to be Christmas focused. This is just how I was raised. But I absolutely love what you said about the fact that the fathers were gone. And then also I'll throw this in there from a literary standpoint. You can't have both parents be terrible and you can't have both parents be good. Otherwise, the character would not be fucked up, right? There has to be some kind of a foil and some kind of a like tension there, just from a narrative standpoint. Plus, also that's how families are. I don't know anyone who has two great, perfect parents. Just don't. If you do, drop it in the chat.
Yeah, you're one in a million.
I will mail you a signed book if you do drop it.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question and then we're going to head to the chat for questions. So as I was saying earlier, just put any question you have at all for Sarah or Lucy or both in the chat and I will ask them in the last sort of 15 minutes of the event. I think I'm going to finish by asking this question that I'm intrigued to know the answer from both of you. So with the rise of popularity of women-driven horror and dystopian fiction and sad girl fiction, as it's been coined, critique of the genre has also obviously come up, particularly of its unlikable female characters, despite the fact that there's a clear appetite from audiences for these type of characters and these type of stories that center around unlikable quote unquote women. You know, why do you think that some people struggle so much to stomach unlikable women, even in genres like horror, where things that are unlikable or unconventional are supposed to be expected within these genres?
All right, I'm gonna go on this one because I'm pissed. Not at your question, not at your question. Sad girl lit is the most infantilizing description. There is not like some genre of literature. All of literature is dealing with human suffering. You don't call it sad boy lit, okay? They've been sad and writing about their jobs since the dawn of time, and all of their characters are unlikable too. And the idea that we would be able to write happy novels about well-adjusted people that anyone would want to read in this time in history is absolutely insane to me. You have the idea of the girl instead of the woman, lit, which is your shorting literature, so you don't even give us the honor of being called literature. You won't even say the full word in relation to our work, and we're just sad. We're not sad. We're grappling with a dystopian society that is taking our rights away. We're fucking pissed. And we're women and we're grown and we have money and we have bodies and we deserve autonomy. It drives me nuts. And I know that this was some kind of packaging for a PR to like figure out how to group us together. But it is one of the most dismissive ways to describe work that is grappling with very real issues. And it's crazy to me because I can't think of one book in the whole canon of literature. I mean, I'm sorry, it was like the dude was like Lolita's narrator, like a happy, likable man. You know what I mean? Like I like I don't know. It's just so anyway, I'm sorry, it drives me nuts. And I think it's just like a male way to further keep us small.
I love that we're coining that Lolita is weird boy lit or sad boy lit.
Yes. What's it? Horny boy lit?
Yeah. I
Curvy boy lit?
I do really echo that as well, actually, to be honest. And I think it is totally a marketing tool. And it frustrates me that like even I've fallen victim to that because it's like how it's the only way that I can shout into the void in like a quick way. But like, like weird girl lit is kind of the thing that I get a lot as well. And I feel like it's that thing of I feel like it's the only way to very quickly describe my book, but then you don't want it to become that's because that's not all it is. It's not a weird girl book. It's a book about domestic violence, like which, is weird, but it's not, I hear you like so much and also really agree. I think I actually can't even remember what the question is because I got so enraptured in like I was like, yeah, I'm ready to like get up and like fight the internet. What was the question?
Well, it was, I feel like we both
I
encapsulated
do,
it.
Lucy, there is something that you said that's correct. I have to separate myself from the fact that there is the writing of the art and then there's the selling of the art and the placing of it on a bookshelf. Right. And so when you get to the bookshelf portion and you have booksellers who we love you, you're the best, need to make a display and put a bunch of books together, then yes, you're going to come up with something like Sad Girl Lit. So I also need to address the fact that while it feels like it's underscored by a very male focused way of putting us down, there is also the very real capitalist side of it, which is people have to categorize your work. I don't even know if I would call what I do surreal. I know it's not magical realism for sure. I don't know, Lucy, if you actually think you're like straight horror or if you think that you're somewhere else in the realm. But some of this is we have to give booksellers a way to talk about our work and a shorthand for it. And so I also have been, yeah, sad girl lit. Like if somebody asks me on a dating app, what do you write? I'll be like surreal sad girl lit because, I'm probably talking to some hot guy who's stupid, right? So there is a place for it. If you do the elevator pitch, right? That exists.
I also love that now whoever speaks to you next on Tinder is going to be like, am I the stupid boy? Like,
Okay, Lucy, it's Raya. I can't go on Tinder. There's too many weird. Okay, I have to go on Raya.
I know.
Okay.
I mean, I think I remember what the question was though, because you reminded me as you were talking. I was like, oh my God, that's the question. It's about unlikable women, isn't it? And like why they're
Yes.
palatable and why they can't be stomached. Um, I think it's because I don't know. I think that subconsciously men realize that if we see bad women, that we'll start misbehaving. And like, so, maybe maybe they are doing things that are wrong. Maybe they are killing people and eating them and putting them into pies. And maybe I'm not going to kill someone and eat them and put them into a pie, but I might, stand up for myself once in a while, in lieu of baking human meat. But I don't know, I think subconsciously men are a little bit scared that they're gonna like it's the kind of, it's the kind of work that's gonna inspire us to advocate for ourselves more. Like I know when I was reading your book, I was like, so many boxes opened, so many angers came out that I didn't expect to feel so viscerally from just such short vignettes. And I think it's just the sort of kind of provocative work that makes women really question things, which is why we write and why we read, is to kind of realize things about ourselves and about our friends and our loved ones that we didn't know. And I think, yeah, I think they're maybe a little bit scared. I don't want to speak for all of them, but
I mean, Lucy, I love what you said, and I really love that I get to talk to you. So, obviously, Jenna, great job putting us together because clearly we are twin hearts. Um, I do think there's a way in which if you have a really rough childhood, there is a higher likelihood you will be drawn to writing because you're afraid to speak. This is just psychologically shown that a lot of people who write, it's because they were afraid to advocate for themselves or have needs, and it felt like the only way they could express themselves. And I feel like it is a process of self-discovery when you're writing. You're figuring out what you're mad at and why. And you're starting to see the world when you write it down. And you're starting to see your own feelings when you write it down. And also, when I'm writing, and Lucy, I would love to hear if you feel the same way. I know that I'm writing the truth when I feel uncomfortable and I want to cry and I don't want to do it and I don't want to say it. That's when I know I'm doing the real work, because anyone can sit down and write you an ABC murder book. Lucy and I, if you told us by next week, we will give you $7 million, you got to write one murder book, we would do it, because that's not hard. That's a formula, right? What's harder is to be vulnerable enough to write down the things that you think in your head that you're terrified to say out loud. And what's crazy about that is whenever you go on book tour, it turns out everyone else has been having those thoughts. Um, and so I think it's really, I think people do get freaked out by it. I do think that I can see it when I'm dating. They love the idea of dating a writer, but when they read my book, they freak out, you know? Because like if you meet me, I'm like a pretty happily disposed person. I'll talk deeply with you about art and like big issues, but I'm not like, I don't think you would look at me and be like, she's going to write a book about a meat quarry, right? And I think, Lucy, you're the same. Like, if I just met you on the street and we were at a coffee shop, would I assume you were going to write about cannibalism? I probably would not have picked that out of a hat, right? Um, but what I think is really important as a writer is you have to be that vulnerable and you have to go to the place where you're afraid to go. And what you find there is humanity. You find other people and you find out you're not as alone as you thought you were. You find out there's a girl named Lucy who also has the same thoughts and is going through the same shit in a different way. And so I don't know where I was going with all that, but I think it's important that we continue to do what we're doing.
You both answered that question with the level of passion and rage that I expected you to. So thank you. I'm just seeing some questions pop up in the chat, so I'm gonna start going through them. One I was gonna ask first is, who is your favorite or best realized mother in fiction? That can cover books, TV, films. Like, who is a standout mother for you?
I really love Miss Honey from Matilda, which is not on
That you took
brand.
mine. No, that's not fair. You took
Did I
mine.
actually?
Yes.
I love her. I love her so much. I love her because she's so real. She gets sad, and it's okay that she gets sad, but she feels joy and she wants to give joy to people, and that's a wonderful thing. But she's not one-dimensional, which I like about her, and she's brave. I love, like, you don't get better than Miss Honey. She is like the creme de la creme of mothers.
She manages to walk this like beautiful line between being corny, like she
Mhm.
could so easily veer to corny, and instead she's so human, and you just want to spend time with her. I'm assuming that there's a way in the cinematography where she's like always shot in a golden light, like that's how I see her, and she's such a perfect foil to the other mother, who you're like, you chose books, I chose looks. It's just it's perfect. But there is something about Miss Honey where like she doesn't irritate me. And there's so many like perfect mothers that you would see like in TV that you would think, oh, that would be great. But like, oh, June Cleaver or whatever. No, it's Miss Honey all the way.
Why that is. I think I know why that is though. It's because she doesn't patronize the kids.
Yes. Yes, she just lets them be kids and she supports their work.
Mhm.
I don't know about you, Lucy, but I did not. I came from a working class family and they did not think art and writing was like a way to make money or a path forward. And so I think the other thing about Miss Honey is you see her like supporting artistic inclinations in kids. You see her like letting the children be who they are. And I will say, I want to be really hopeful for a second. One of the things I'm so excited about right now is watching people our age who have done the work start to have kids and watching them give
Oh
their
yeah,
kids what we did not get,
yeah.
letting their kids explore with gender, with art. It is really, really cool.
It's
I have a couple of friends that I'm watching raise kids, and I'm like, I wish I would have gotten that. I really wish that would have happened for me. And so, if I have any hope, I hope that we're seeing a generation of children who are raised to like who they are and be exactly who they are. And hopefully, I'm going to say this, be US specific, stop shooting up schools as a result.
yeah.
I'm going to go to, I'm seeing a couple of questions about favorite authors, books or writers that have shaped you, and also unexpected or unusual sources of inspiration for your work.
A good one. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can do that. Visual art for me is a lot of it. I have a very good friend, a painter, Dan Hirschlin. I mean, a painter, but also the paintings are like sculpted in 3D. Lucy, the paintings look like our work in painting form. You seriously, I'll send you the link on Instagram. It's us, but if we make art. And when Dan always wanted to be a writer and wasn't very good at writing, according to them, and they became a visual artist. And I would have loved to be a visual artist, but I'm not very good at making visual art, so I became a writer. And so it's very funny to kind of see both of us, our work feels very similar in that respect. And I think, because I can't make visual art the way I want to based on talent and expense and all that stuff, it's writing for me. So yeah, I find myself very much in conversation with visual art. And I do think my goal with every book, and this is gonna sound really pretentious, every single time I want to write a book that hasn't been written before and do something with form that is new or feels new to me. And that's like a crazy challenge to set for yourself, but that's what makes me excited about doing the work. So yeah, I think it would be visual art for me. And then in terms of what I read, I love books in translation. I'm constantly reading books. There's a lot of stuff in English that I like, but I'm always Tove Ditlevsen is one that I've been loving. I don't think she's in translation, but Barbara Comans I think is fantastic. Um, for I mean, I could go on forever. I blurbed a book called Hunchback that's coming out. It's a 90-page novella, really incredible. Keep an eye out for that one. Yeah, I like weird stuff usually in translation. Then I also love like Brian Evanson, huge fan of Brian's work. Yeah, I mean, I could go on forever. Carmen Maria Machado, of course. I mean, it's just I'm also the other problem is I'm not at home, so I can't just look at my bookshelf and just rattle off everything. So I'm gonna pass this one to Lucy.
I love to watch people engaged with their craft, which is like for me, like one of my favorite things to do is watch clothing designers.
Ooh.
Yeah, I love it because they have such a different way of telling stories because they have to do it through shape and through color. And so that visual side is like I find really fascinating. There's a designer who makes clothing purely and only and exclusively out of historical fabrics so that he can carry the stories
Oh,
into
wow.
which I just think is such an amazing way to frame your statement as an artist. Like,
Have you seen the McQueen documentary?
I haven't. Is that, do I need to add this to my
Okay,
list?
you should leave right now and
Okay.
go watch the
Bye, guys.
McQueen. The McQueen documentary is going to be your whole heart.
Oh
When you
no.
see the amount of research that goes into each one of those collections and what he's basing them on, you're going to lose your mind.
Okay, that is, I'm gonna do that straight away,
Yeah.
actually.
No, but I love what you're saying because I think there's something else. Like I love to listen to podcasts about how like albums were made,
Yeah.
right? One of my favorite bands, Idols, they're UK. I love Idols very much. All of their albums start with a visual and color first. And I never thought of like making an album
It's
with
so
a isn't,
fascinating.
isn't that crazy? Like they make a vision board before they make an album. And it's very similar to what you're talking about with clothing design, where I get really excited to see process, but keep going. I'm sorry, I got
No,
excited.
no. I mean, I totally agree. There's a band and it's so niche and nobody knows who they are, but they're called The Books and they make everything out of tapes they find at like charity shops and like stitch everything together and make these beautiful soundscapes and they just sound so different to anything I've ever heard. They're called The Books. Please go look them up. In terms of work, I have to agree. Tr like work in translation is like really my bag. Like Eva Balthazar is someone I've been reading loads of recently, like Mammoth. I loved Mammoth, if anybody's read it, like it's incredible. And I love this is going to come as no shock to anybody, but I really love like Shirley Jackson and Angela Carter. And you know, like it's interesting because like when we think of like the, you know, the people who created fairy tales, we think of the Grimm brothers, but really it was our mothers telling us bedtime stories. And so to have women telling these stories, I love those versions because they feel very real to me. I think that's probably my little, sorry, that's my last feminist rant for the night. I'm not going to do it again.
I don't think that's true, and that's okay. You're like, I promise
Um,
we're gonna both stop being feminist and angry really soon. It's like, I don't really think that's true.
No.
I also don't think anyone wants that. I feel like that's why people are here. I'm seeing a question about how you both came up with the titles for your novels and how did you decide on the final one. I also saw a question for you, Sarah, about why your protagonists are both called Cassie.
I will let you do your title first, Lucy. How about that?
Okay. So originally the lamb was called it was called I Am the Bleating Lamb, which we shortened for capitalism. Um but I still really love that title because that was my statement. That's what I wanted to say in my writing. And that lives on in terms of the echo of the lamb. And there's also like a nice symmetry with something like Silence of the Lambs and kind of lambs
Hmm.
within horror imagery, lambs within the like in terms of imagery, in terms of like family and domesticity and all of that. But yeah, my title was originally I Am the Bleating Lamb, and the only reason we changed it was so that it would sell better. So there's not like a nice extravagant answer.
I think it's one of the things that the more you do this, you have to become flexible about certain things, and it's always going to be your title and your cover. And I've noticed you're always going to have to battle over one. If it's not your title, then it's your cover that you're going to have to like push back on. Um, and it is interesting because once you get to a certain point, the title does become like a collaborative process, right? For Book of X, though, especially on $2 Radio, they really, and I will say this with Scribner for Ripe, and I got a lot of freedom. I think my only issue there was they accidentally purchased two books with the same title, so I had to change mine. And that kicked off like a couple months of like kicking ideas around. And I'm glad that we landed it right. I actually think we got to the perfect title, but that definitely took a couple months. And but of course the cover knocked it out of the park immediately, right? So it's like you got to pick your fights. And for Book of X, I mean, that was just what it was called from day one for me. And when I sent it to $2 Radio, I never thought to change it. I just never thought about it. And I don't even think, yeah, would I take it back? I don't know, but it was just what the manuscript was called, and then I never changed it, and no one told me to.
It was meant to be.
Not the answer anybody wants to hear at all. But yeah, I just that's what I called it from day one, and that's what it was. Oh,
I'm
wait,
just
there was something else about Cassie. Okay, yeah. Um, Ever since I started writing, it was always Cassie as kind of like a parallel for me. Um, my agent jokes that we're going to have something called the Cassie cycle and that eventually I'll stop doing it. I don't really know if I will. She just obviously shortened from Cassandra, the girl who's cursed to see the future and no one will believe her. Couple things here. I hate picking names for characters. It is the most unbearable process. It either sounds too simple or like you're trying too hard. And once I hit Cassie, I was like, I'm not even trying to do this again. It's a waste of time. So partially it's laziness and partially she's kind of like bizarro me, the version of myself that is able to say all of the things that like day to day I would only say in therapy probably. And also I saw you nodding, Lucy, so I would love to hear your thoughts on this. People do not understand how heavy and loaded it is to name a character. Like it is unbearable.
It really is. It's that thing of like it's like naming a person is like giving them their identity or like solidifying their identity. Like once you've given them the name, they can't, that's it. That's like it feels so final. But it's also like it's something that affects every aspect of your novel. It impacts the tone, it impacts the way they talk to each other. So I actually, even though it's so tiny, so I think the idea of deciding Cassie and that's it, full stop, we're done. Like there's such a simple sophistication in that actually is very like practical.
It's also just relieving, but also too, I will say this, I have written these books now in a way where they do loophole into each other. Like Ripe is really a portal to the middle of Book of X. If you like pulled that out when she gets a job, right? Then you could really read Ripe as like um another version of that in a different universe. So there is kind of a playing with that for sure.
last question before we let everyone get on with their evenings. This is to both of you. Once you've published a book, are you able to let it go and be happy with it, or do you still find yourself thinking of certain scenes? How do you know when it's done? I also saw another question about if there's anything you particularly struggle with as part of your writing process.
You're
I
going for
We're never gonna let them go. I love them so much. I kind of echo kind of what you've already said though about like it's like finding different pieces of yourself and different questions that you have about the world or things that you want to resolve in the world. So it's sort of hard to let them go because like the things that I'm talking about in my book, and I know that you'll probably feel the same, have not been resolved and are probably not going to be resolved in my lifetime. Um, and so I don't know if I ever do let them go. I still think about like Margot, my main character, daily, all the time. I feel really protective of her because she goes through a lot. Her mother's a cannibal. And in terms of like something I struggle with, I think honestly, like ADHD is a bitch. Like it can make the writing process really challenging. So I cannot sit down and just write for long periods of times. I have to find like very holistic ways to work with my brain to make it do the thing that I want it to do. And I think it's that thing of it's just I don't know if anybody has ADHD, but it is that paralysis of just in your head being like giving the command, being like, do this thing, and then your body just staying very, very still. It's really terrifying, actually. The more I talk about it, the more I realize how scary it is. So I think it's about finding ways to be in touch with myself, to be in touch with my body, to be in touch with my brain and my mind, and then balance that in a practical and emotional sense with the really kind of traumatic subject matter that you dive into, and finding that balance so that you can write about those things without having a nervy bee is kind of a priority for me.
Amazing. Okay. I'm gonna go off on a small tangent, and I'm sorry, Jenna, because I know we need to wrap this up. I have OCD to balance your ADHD, so mine more manifest when I'm writing as a mania, and I need order, and I need balance, and I need a mirroring. I need there to be 3 sections. I need there, I need every scene to have a counter scene. I need every visual to make it all the way through, right? So my OCD manifests as that. And for me, like I I I want to edit books while I'm reading them out loud on book tour. I usually only read the opening couple pages because it's very hard for me to read certain sections out loud because they're brutal. And I have people in the audience say, that's not what the sentence says here. And I'm like, that's because it sucks. That sentence was stupid, so there is an editing like that. And I can probably think it's like a musician, like changing a riff while they're playing something live. But by the time a book is bound, I will never read it cover to cover again. I can't look at it again. I will write my first draft in a month or 4 months and then edit for years. And by the time it's gotten to the point where it's in a binding with a cover on a shelf, I won't ever look at it again, and I don't ever want to think about it again because I've tried to exercise whatever demon was in me. And I'm going through that right now when we talk about movie adaptations. The number one question is, do you want to write the script? And what I've realized is you're asking me, do I want to go back into this trauma and spend another 4 years with it and have people tell me that I didn't do a good enough job with the dialogue? And the answer to that is fuck no. No, I don't want to go back into the Book of X that I already did all my catharsis with these books. And by the time, and I'm sure Lucy, you're seeing this now, by the time you write a first draft and it gets published, you're often looking at 4 years, 5 years. And so you're almost having to go on book tour with this old outfit you used to wear every day and put it back on. And you're like, this is dingy. I don't like how it, and like, for 4 years, you were wearing it every day and you were like, I look fucking good. And by the time it comes out, you're like, ew, ew, ew. I like, so disgusting. And so there is like a weird disconnect because I literally remember walking into the Scribner office and the finished printed copies of Ripe were on the table, and the editor said, it's such a great book. And I remember looking up and going, I don't know who wrote that, like, because I just went into this manic state and I wrote a first draft and then I edited it for a bunch of time. And by the time you get to the end, you're so sick of looking at the manuscript that you're just like, enough, go on in the world, yeah, but yes, of course, there were things where, like Book of X, I'm going to say this now, Jenna, please don't yell at me. I wouldn't have given it a third part where she moves to the country, not to spoil anybody. I look at that now and it feels very unnecessary. All of that stuff could have just happened while she was in the city, right? There's stuff like that where when you get older as a writer, you can start to see where you were young and you did things not the right way. But I say this every time I teach class. You are meant to write the best book you can at the time you write it. And the reason I say that is because I see people want to hold on to projects for 10 years, 15 years, and you lose all the urgency, all the passion that you need to get a first draft out. And so any of these books, the reason I'm done with them is because I know I worked as hard as I could and I wrote the best book I could at the time that I wrote it. And that's the only thing you need to do. I'm capturing a moment in time, and that's how I felt at that time to the best of my ability.
I think that's such a nice sentiment to end things on. So thank you for that, Sarah. And thank you as well, like both of you, for just the conversation has, I mean, even for me, asking the questions been so interesting to listen to. And hopefully it's been like that for the audience too. And thank you everyone for spending your Friday night with us. I'm gonna wrap things up now, but please do go and buy and pre-order Sarah and Lucy's books because they're amazing, both of them.
Thank you for having us. I could have yapped with Lucy all day, and I'm so sorry we ran over again. I thank you for your questions. Lucy, you're a dream. I hope I get to hang out with you in person one day.
So are you. Stop it.
All right. Thank you again.